Grand Rising, my dear ones. This is your girl, Empress Queen, Ashe. I hope all is well with the tribe this morning. I hope everyone is feeling good, feeling great. I hope your family's doing well. I hope your pets are doing well. Friends, loved ones, Ashe loves. I send my love to you all. This morning, this is a a little small section, a little small lecture on the Pharisees, seduces, the Essenes by Flavius Josephus, 75 AD. Everybody knew who Josephus was. They say he the one who wrote the Bible, the New Testament anyway. My disclaimer is in the description box, but as always, I will state it again that I hold no copyrights to this content. This is solely for educational purposes, um, to be protected under the Fair Use Act of 1976, Code 107. These is, everybody knows I'm all about the esoteric and the occult, spirituality. It's all the same. It all works hand in hand in my book. Um, Everybody knows I'm Empress Queen. I'm all about everything spiritual. Esoteric and occult is also spiritual for those who don't know. So I'm gonna run this, and behind it I might run another one called the Essene Jesus, the Essene Christ. I might do that because this one here is only about 30 minutes long, and the other one is 2 hours long. So I'm gonna run this one first, then I get y'all intake if anybody come in, because I'm gonna be running around here doing a little cleaning myself. But this is the Pharisees, the seduces, the Pharisees, seduces, Essenes by Flavius Josephus of 75 AD.
The Wars of the Jews. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Chapter 8. The Three Sects. For there are three philosophical sects among the Jews. The followers of the first of which are the Pharisees, of the second the Sadducees, and the third sect, which pretends to a severer discipline, are called Essenes. These last are Jews by birth, and seem to have a greater affection for one another than the other sects have. These Essenes reject pleasures as an evil, but esteem continence and the conquest over our passions to be virtue. They neglect wedlock, but choose out other persons' children, while they are pliable and fit for learning, and esteem them to be of their kindred, and form them according to their own manners. They do not absolutely deny the fitness of marriage, and the succession of mankind thereby continued, but they guard against the lascivious behavior of women, and are persuaded that none of them preserve their fidelity to one man. These men are despisers of riches, and so very communicative as raises our admiration. Nor is there any one to be found among them who hath more than another, for it is a law among them that those who come to them must let what they have to be common to the whole order, insomuch that among them all there is no appearance of poverty or excess of riches, but every one's possessions are intermingled with every other's possessions. And so there is, as it were, one patrimony among all the brethren. They think that oil is a defilement, and if any one of them be anointed without his own approbation, it is wiped off his body, for they think to be sweaty is a good thing, as they do also to be clothed in white garments. They also have stewards appointed to take care of their common affairs, who every one of them have no separate business for any, but what is for the uses of them all. They have no one certain city, but many of them dwell in every city. And if any of their sect come from other places, what they have lies open for them, just as if it were their own. And they go into such as they never knew before, as if they had been ever so long acquainted with them. For which reason They carry nothing at all with them when they travel into remote parts, though still they take their weapons with them, for fear of thieves. Accordingly, there is, in every city where they live, one appointed particularly to take care of strangers, and to provide garments and other necessaries for them. But the habit and management of their bodies is such as children use, or in fear of their masters. Nor do they allow of the change of garments or of shoes, till they be first torn to pieces, or worn out by time. Nor do they either buy or sell anything to one another, but every one of them gives what he hath to him that wanteth it, and receives from him again in lieu of it what may be convenient for himself. And although there be no requital made, they are fully allowed to take what they want of whomsoever they please. And as for their piety towards God, it is very extraordinary. For before sunrising they speak not a word about profane matters, but put up certain prayers which they have received from their forefathers, as if they made a supplication for its rising. After this, every one of them are sent away by their curators, to exercise some of those arts wherein they are skilled, in which they labour with great diligence till the 5th hour. After which they assemble themselves together again into one place, and when they have clothed themselves in white veils, they then bathe their bodies in cold water. And after this purification is over, they every one meet together in an apartment of their own, into which it is not permitted to any of another sect to enter, while they go, after a pure manner, into the dining room, as into a certain holy temple, and quietly set themselves down. Upon which the baker lays them loaves in order. The cook also brings a single plate of one sort of food, and sets it before every one of them. But a priest says grace before meat, and it is unlawful for any one to taste of the food before grace be said. The same priest, when he hath dined, says grace again after meat. And when they begin and when they end, they praise God, as he that bestows their food upon them. After which they lay aside their white garments, and betake themselves to their labours again till the evening. Then they return home to supper after the same manner. And if there be any strangers there, they sit down with them. Nor is there ever any clamour or disturbance to pollute their house, but they give every one leave to speak in their turn, which silence thus kept in their house appears to foreigners like some tremendous mystery, the cause of which is that perpetual sobriety they exercise, and the same settled measure of meat and drink that is allotted them, and that such as is abundantly sufficient for them. And truly, as for other things, they do nothing but according to the injunctions of their curators. Only these two things are done among them at every one's own free will, which are to assist those that want it, and to show mercy. For they are permitted of their own accord to afford succour to such as deserve it, when they stand in need of it, and to bestow food on those that are in distress. But they cannot give anything to their kindred without the curators. They dispense their anger after a just manner, and restrain their passion. They are eminent for fidelity, and are the ministers of peace. Whatsoever they say also is firmer than an oath, but swearing is avoided by them, and they esteem it worse than perjury, or they say that he who cannot be believed without swearing by God is already condemned. Footnote: this practice of the Essenes, in refusing to swear and esteeming swearing in ordinary occasions worse than perjury, is delivered here in general words, as are the parallel injunctions of our Saviour, Matthew 6 verse 34, 23 verse 16, and of St. James 5 verse 12. But all admit of particular exceptions for solemn causes, and on great and necessary occasions. Thus these very Essenes, who here do so zealously avoid swearing, are related, in the very next section, to admit none till they take tremendous oaths to perform their several duties to God and to their neighbour, without supposing they thereby break this rule, not to swear at all. The case is the same in Christianity, as we learn from the apostolical constitutions, which, although they agree with Christ and St. James in forbidding to swear in general, yet do they explain it elsewhere by avoiding to swear falsely, and to swear often and in vain, and again by not swearing at all, but withal adding that, if that cannot be avoided, to swear truly, which abundantly explain to us the nature of the measures of this general injunction. End footnote. They also take great pains in studying the writings of the ancients, and choose out of them what is most for the advantage of their soul and body. And they inquire after such roots and medicinal stones as may cure their distempers. But now, if any one hath a mind to come over to their sect, he is not immediately admitted, but he is prescribed the same method of living which they use for a year, while he continues excluded. And they give him also a small hatchet, and the forementioned girdle, and the white garment. And when he hath given evidence during that time that he can observe their continence, he approaches nearer to their way of living, and is made a partaker of the waters of purification. Yet is he not even now admitted to live with them, for after this demonstration of his fortitude, his temper is tried 2 more years. And if he appear to be worthy, they then admit him into their society. And before he is allowed to touch their common food, he is obliged to take tremendous oaths that, in the first place, he will exercise piety towards God, and then that he will observe justice towards men, and that he will do no harm to anyone, either of his own accord or by the command of others, that he will always hate the wicked and be assistant to the righteous, that he will ever show fidelity to all men, and especially to those in authority, because no one obtains the government without God's assistance, and that if he be in authority, he will at no time whatever abuse his authority, nor endeavour to outshine his subjects either in his garments or any other finery, that he will be perpetually a lover of truth, and propose to himself to reprove those that tell lies, that he will keep his hands clear from theft, and his soul from unlawful gains, and that he will neither conceal anything from those of his own sect, nor discover any of their doctrines to others, no, not though anyone should compel him so to do at the hazard of his life. Moreover, he swears to communicate their doctrines to no one any otherwise than as he received them himself, that he will abstain from robbery, and will equally preserve the books belonging to their sect, and the names of the angels or messengers. Footnote. This mention of the names of angels, so particularly preserved by the Essenes, if it means more than those messengers which were employed to bring them the peculiar books of their sect, looks like a prelude to that worshipping of angels blamed by St. Paul as superstitious and unlawful in some such sort of people as these Essenes were, Colossians 2, verse 8, as is the prayer to or towards the sun for his rising every morning, mentioned before, section 5, very like those not much later observances made mention of in the preaching of Peter, and regarding a kind of worship of angels, of the month and of the moon, and not celebrating the new moons or other festivals unless the moon appeared, which indeed seems to me the earliest mention of any regard to the phases in fixing the Jewish calendar, of which the Talmud and later rabbis talk so much, and upon so very little ancient foundation. End footnote. These are the oaths by which they secure their proselytes to themselves. But for those that are caught in any heinous sins, they cast them out of their society, and he who is thus separated from them does often die after a miserable manner. For as he is bound by the oath he hath taken, and by the customs he hath been engaged in, He is not at liberty to partake of that food that he meets with elsewhere, but is forced to eat grass, and to famish his body with hunger, till he perish. For which reason they receive many of them again when they are at their last gasp, out of compassion to them, as thinking the misery they have endured till they came to the very brink of death, to be a sufficient punishment for the sins they had been guilty of. But in the judgments they exercise, they are most accurate and just, nor do they pass sentence by the votes of a court that is fewer than 100. And as to what is once determined by that number, it is unalterable. What they most of all honor, after God himself, is the name of their legislator, Moses, whom if anyone blaspheme, he is punished capitally. They also think it a good thing to obey their elders, and the major part. Accordingly, if 10 of them be sitting together, no one of them will speak, while the other 9 are against it. They also avoid spitting in the midst of them, or on the right side. Moreover, they are stricter than any other of the Jews in resting from their labors on the 7th day. For they not only get their food ready the day before, that they may not be obliged to kindle a fire on that day, but they will not remove any vessel out of its place, nor go to stool thereon. Nay, on other days they dig a small pit, a foot deep, with a paddle, which kind of hatchet is given them when they are first admitted among them, and covering themselves round with their garment, that they may not affront the divine rays of light, they ease themselves into that pit, after which they put the earth that was dug out again into the pit. And even this they do only in the more lonely places, which they choose out for this purpose. And although this easement of the body be natural, yet it is a rule with them to wash themselves after it, as if it were a defilement to them.
Another link in the succession was the teaching of Buddha, who in India set in motion the cosmic wheel of life. Finally, there was the Essene Brotherhood of the Dead Sea, which planted the Essene tree of life, whose highest branch was represented by the Essene Jesus, latest and therefore closest to us of all the great teachers of humanity. The quintessence of his revelation is found in the Sermon on the Mount. Why is it necessary that every few thousand years a great teacher should come to mankind? Is it that the teaching of his predecessors were not complete or were insufficient? Were the earlier teachers greater than those who came after, or was the reverse the case? For an understanding of the essence of the Sermon on the Mount and the role of Jesus the Essene, these questions and their attendant problems require to be answered. According to the Essene traditions, each of the great teachers of humanity reveal the whole truth in a complete, all-sided, and absolute revelation. Since the laws of life and of the universe have been, are, and always will be the same, in the Essene view, the revelation of each teacher has two aspects, an inner or esoteric aspect and an outer or exoteric. The value and extent of the revelation of a great teacher is not limited by him with his infinite knowledge, but is limited by the ability of his disciples and of the multitudes to understand his teaching. In all ages, the great teachers have given a complete revelation of the whole all-sided truth concerning the laws of life and of the universe to a group of disciples representing the minority whose individual evolution had reached the point where they were able to understand their master's teaching in its entirety. The same holds true today, when there is still only a minority capable of understanding the all-sided truth. For this reason, each great teacher revealed an esoteric revelation which is absolute, all-sided, unlimited, as well as an exoteric teaching adapted to the degree of understanding of the multitude of his age. The latter, easily comprehensible to the masses, in each case became the thought of millions among whom it was propagated, though in extending the truth, some of the depth of the revelation had necessarily to be sacrificed. The greatness of each teacher lay in his ability to reveal exactly what the multitude needed and could understand and follow. The adaptation of a great universal teaching to a particular age is a task of the first magnitude. As regards to their esoteric teaching, the geniuses of the great teachers of mankind was their ability to choose from the multitude those few who had the necessary degree of individual evolution for the understanding, living, and practice of the revelations made to them. The essence of the Sermon on the Mount is contained in its first 9 verses, 2 of which are introductory, while the remainder consists of 7 declarations, the Beatitudes, beginning with the words, "Blessed are." These verses will be considered from the universal standpoint outlined in the preceding section, and the discussion of them will be based on 2 texts, the Gospel according to St. Matthew, verses 1 through 9, which has been officially adapted by the churches, and the Essene Gospel of Peace, which was treated as apocryphal by the early synods. The 7 Beatitudes. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, verse 1 through 2. These 2 verses are usually regarded as an unessential introduction to the verses that follow, a framework to the teaching. But since this sentence is found in identical terms in both the official and the apocryphal text, it should not be deemed unimportant. It requires to be analyzed from the esoteric as well as from the exoteric point of view. In these verses, the words multitudes, mountain, and disciples are all of a very great significance. The Essene Gospel of Peace shows that the expression multitudes and disciples refer respectively to the exoteric and esoteric aspects of Jesus' revelation. Each verse of the Sermon on the Mount has to be considered from this twofold standpoint. The esoteric revelation is important on account of its all-sidedness and depth, and the exoteric owing to the hundreds of millions who follow it and its historic role in the evolution of the Western world. The expression mountain also has both an esoteric and an exoteric meaning. Exoterically, mountain stands for a material form. For a part of nature, according to the Essene tradition, it is esoterically the symbol of height, of superiority, of the highest degree of individual evolution. The notion of mountain recurs again and again in the history of humanity's great teachers. Thus, Zarathustra lived on a lofty mountain in ancient Samaria before he made known his great revelation. Moses brought down from Mount Sinai the exoteric commandments for the multitudes and the esoteric communions for the elect, and it was into Mount Nebo that he ascended to disappear from history. Jesus likewise chose a mountain for his most important revelation, but it is clear from the text of the Essene Gospel that more is meant than the presence of Jesus on the mountain above the multitude. The symbol of the mountain also means Jesus, the Essene himself, as representing the highest degree of individual evolution, the channel for the absolute and all-sided revelation of eternal truth. In the second verse, there are 2 important terms, mouth and taught. In a text as important on the Sermon on the Mount, it is not redundancy when Matthew and John write, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying. Freethinkers have been wont to poke fun at this verse as being pleonastic and illogical. They point out ironically that nobody can say something without opening his mouth, and that nobody can teach without saying something. They take the literal text as it stands without regard to the twofold nature, exoteric and esoteric, of the revelation. In this sentence, every word has its meaning and importance. According to the Essene tradition, a great teacher always used 2 means for the transmission of his revelation to his followers. First, his voice or word, and secondly, his thought. The term voice or word occurs many times over in all the great sacred books of humanity. The word is a power, an energy, a vibration. It is one of the forces of life and the universe, according to the Essene teaching. The great teachers use the word or voice to set in motion the feeling body of their followers and disciples. The feeling body in Essene tradition consists of the totality of the person's feeling, which form a field of forces around him in the same way that a magnetic field forms around a magnetic pole. Thought, on the other hand, is the power used by these great thinkers to set in motion the thinking body or mind of their followers. The 2 powerful instruments of the voice and thought have been used repeatedly throughout universal history by all the great masters of humanity for the transmission of their revelations to the feeling and thinking bodies of their disciples and of the multitude. It is these 2 powers that the words mouth and taught respectively refer. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 3. The third verse, containing the first of Jesus' great teaching, has been much misinterpreted by Bible critics as well as by the Orthodox churches. It is clear that by the expression poor in spirit, Jesus did not mean of limited understanding. It has a much deeper significance. Again and again in the Gospels, we find Jesus stressing the principle of simplicity, and it is no accident that the first of his teaching deals with this principle, which is at once a natural and a spiritual law. And from no law have men and mankind deviated, and do still deviate, as much as from the law of simplicity. In another passage of the Essene Gospel of Peace is found the saying of Jesus that men are masters of everything they possess, which is necessary for individual growth in truth, but that everything superfluous becomes the master of men, and they become its slave. On nearly every occasion of his teaching, Jesus emphasizes the law of simplicity as a natural and a spiritual law. Both in the Synoptic Gospels and in the Essene Gospel of Peace, he makes numerous references to all the kinds of deviation from this law and to the various consequences. Thus he speaks of the impossibility of a rich man entering the kingdom of heaven on account of his unnecessary possessions, and of the effect of these upon his consciousness. Likewise, he says that the scribes and the Pharisees, with their burden of intellectual possessions, can in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven, for this kingdom is harmony with the law. What are the most frequent departures from this basic law of simplicity which Jesus taught? First, from a simple exoteric standpoint, it is a human disease to try always to possess more than is necessary for individual development. When Jesus condemns the rich man, he does not condemn him as a person, but as a deviation from the law. He does not condemn him for his huge wealth in itself, but for the mentality which goes with that wealth. His material possessions will occupy a large part of his feeling and thinking body, of his energies and of his time, to the detriment of the real values of life, of riches in the kingdom of heaven. As we know from the gospel, Jesus had friends among the rich, because he did not consider wealth or possessions as something evil in themselves, but was against the materialism which they engendered. According to the Essene teaching, a rich man with great possessions can work in entire accordance with the law if he does not develop the spirit of materialism which usually goes with them. Conversely, a poor man without any possessions may represent a deviation from the law if he is materialistic in his consciousness and desires the wealth which is not God. Jesus the Essene taught neither poverty nor wealth as an ideal. He simply taught this great law of simplicity, that the possession or non-possession of material things should not be made an obstacle to individual advance on the path to the kingdom of heaven. Jesus mentioned other deviations from the law of simplicity besides the possession of unnecessary things. When we carry with us a great burden of traditions, religious, social, racial, which one were adequate and true for their age but are now anachronistic, we are heavily handicapping our individual development. According to Jesus the Essene, no one with this dead weight of petrified traditions can enter into the kingdom of heaven. We also deviate from the simplicity enjoined by Jesus in the intellectual field. The reading of thousands of books, good and bad, many years of study devoted to the store of static knowledge of past ages, the acquisition of degrees from universities, and the importance attached to these degrees, to the knowledge and to the books. All these things are dead weight carried on the road towards the kingdom of heaven. It is impossible to enter into the kingdom unless every obstacle to the understanding of the truth in its simplicity is first cast off. If we fulfill this prerequisite, we are in an antechamber to the kingdom of heaven. In addition to individual deviations, there are collective deviations by human society from this law of simplicity. Human society and human institutions are, for the most part, based on superfluous, petrified traditions, narrow-minded dogmas, and useless institutions and knowledge, an immense complexity of things totally unnecessary to individual development. The majority of them are not only unnecessary, but positively harmful. That is why Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." He taught the greatest values of life and of the universe, but the winning of eternal life is dependent on the sacrifice of all these unnecessary and complex things. The third verse, then, is the exoteric expression of the great law of simplicity taught by the Essene in all ages. The whole Essene brotherhood at the Dead Sea, to which Jesus belonged, was a pure and living protest against the useless complications of the outside world. Contemporary writers describing the Essene brotherhood at the Dead Sea emphasized the great simplicity of life there. This simplicity is exemplified in the words and teaching of Jesus. A child can understand the Sermon on the Mount and its very simple teaching. Indeed, if a man wishes to understand it, He must become as a little child who has not yet deviated from this great law of simplicity, who does not carry the dead weight of superfluous material, moral and intellectual baggage which burdens us individually and collectively. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Verse 4. Jesus and the Essenes taught not sadness but joy, and joy of life was one of the basic characteristics noted by contemporary writers who visited the Essene Brotherhood at the Dead Sea. The Synoptic Gospels, and still more the Essene Gospel of Peace, speak again and again of joy and rejoicing, and there is indeed no more optimistic teaching than that of Jesus the Essene. He reveals a law which sets men free, which gives them infinite power and opens the gate to the supreme good, the kingdom of heaven. Since it is evident that Jesus did not teach mourning, what is the connotation of the word mourn from an esoteric standpoint? This verse of the Sermon on the Mount also deals with natural and spiritual law, and with the consequence of deviation of one kind or another form from it. Another great teacher of humanity, Buddha, expresses a similar thought to that conveyed in this passage when he says that there is in the world an ocean of suffering as a result of deviation from the law and the operation of the law of cause and effect. Buddha uses the Pahlavi word samsara to designate this ocean of suffering. According to him, it is suffering to mourn, to become sick, to grow old. It is suffering not to achieve what we have already won. Jesus the Essene also speaks of the ocean of suffering in which humanity lives as a consequence of departure from the law. All men begin their lives in this ocean of suffering. There is none that has not undergone suffering in this world, but suffering is of a great value in man's individual development, since it is a force or power which shows him the consequence of deviation from the law. It makes man conscious of his deviations and consequently the law itself. Jesus the Essene never taught suffering. His teaching was joy and fulfillment. In our material life, suffering calls attention to the dangers of deviation from the laws of nature, and its role is the same for the spiritual life and the spiritual law. Mourning thus represents a certain achievement, the attainment of a certain degree of individual evolution, since it is a recognition of the cause of our suffering and a consciousness of deviation from the law and of the law itself. The act of mourning is a necessary milestone in individual evolution, and those who have not reached it cannot progress on the path towards the kingdom of heaven. Without recognition of past error and deviation from the law, it is not possible to begin the new life which Jesus the Essene taught. The start of this new life is marked by mourning or regret for past deviation from the law. But the word mourn has a further meaning. Since most men deviate from the law, most men suffer. They are plunged into the ocean of suffering of which Buddha speaks. It is of the essence of the moral teaching of Jesus that we shall not be indifferent to this great ocean of suffering caused by ignorance of and deviation from the law on the part of the majority of mankind. The ethics of the Sermon on the Mount and the moral teaching of Jesus the Essene stand forth from all the theoretical and purely intellectual constructions and metaphysical teachings which disregard the ocean of suffering around us, which overlook creative love, the quintessence of Jesus' teaching, and pay no regard to the great law of compassion. The eternal vitality of the Sermon on the Mount and of all the teachings of Jesus consists in this message of active, creative love manifested in deeds. All the great masters, including Jesus, practiced this law, as did the Essenes, who were teachers and healers. They did not live in an ivory tower of their own to merely establish their own harmony with the law, but they went out, they taught, and they healed. Their activity was a wonderful crusade against the ocean of suffering. They brought about the cessation of suffering by taking away its cause in the world. Such is the ethical aspect of the word mourn in the Sermon on the Mount. The good news about the kingdom of heaven brought to mankind by Jesus the Essene is also the good news of the cessation of the suffering of the individual and mankind through understanding and practice of the law and through following of the Master. His life is as important as his teaching, because the truth he reveals is at the same time life. His life expressed the truth, and in his life was the truth made manifest. The word mourn in the Essene Gospel of Peace has therefore several meanings, according as we relate it to the individual or to humanity, to individual evolution or to the creative love, the greatest basic principle of all moral teaching of all ages. Creative love is our duty to the whole world, which is great cause to mourn, since men are plunged into the ocean of suffering, brought about by deviation from the law which Jesus taught to mankind in the most sublime and simplest way. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Verse 5. This verse has been given many different interpretations. In the Essene gospel of peace, it is not meekness towards man, but meekness towards God, towards the law that is commended. Those who are meek before the law shall inherit the earth. Such is the great law revealed by Jesus the Essene. Throughout universal history, rulers and governments have created their own law and have tried to substitute it for the one law which governs the universe and is the source of all forms of existence. In trying to establish their own law in place of this unique law, the rulers and governments failed in meekness before it and deviated from a great rule of life. At various times in history, an Alexander, a Genghis Khan, a Napoleon, or a Hitler have tried to create their own law and force it on humanity, and so deviated not only from the great law of life taught by Jesus, but from another essentially the same pronounced by Moses. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. All the great conquerors set up their own gods. They deviated from the law and they perished. The law did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. For the law is good. It sends sun and rain upon the just and the unjust. But all who depart from the great law of life and seek to follow artificial laws made by themselves go forward to destruction. Manifold are the deviations from the great law of life. Not only rulers and conquerors depart from it, but all of us in different ways and in varying degree. In many families, parents offend against it when they create their own law and force it upon their children as a substitute for the only law. Sometimes children seek to create their own law and force it on their parents. Not only dictators, but lesser potentates try to make themselves the law, but such efforts never succeed for long. Men can work only with the law. The most characteristic expression of deviation from it was the remark of Louis XIV, "I am the state." Many of us feel and say and think this is our own humble ways. This law of meekness is manifested as a natural law in the material universe and also as a higher spiritual law. In the material universe, nature has its immutable laws and creates different plants, animals, and races. These creations, following the laws of nature, evolve, and many of them inherit the earth in the sense that they perpetuate themselves and attain increasingly higher degrees of evolution in the course of generations. Other plants, animals, and races deviate from this great law of meekness by making their own law. Non-recognition of the only law means struggle against it and consequent destruction. Such prehistoric animals as a dinosaur and mastodon were very powerful in their time, but more modest creatures adapted themselves to the law and survived while these monsters perished. Man, who by his superior powers lived in closer harmony with this law than any other being on the planet, became the dominant race and thus inherited the earth. Nature, like a sculptor, creates all kinds of forms, and those that do not correspond to the requirements of the law are destroyed. Those conforming to the law and being in full harmony with it survive as nature's masterpiece. In a material universe, the law of meekness is manifested as a process of natural selection. But this great law has also a spiritual aspect. Those who respect the law of meekness before God, before the law, will reach even higher degrees of individual evolution, while those who disregard it and regard themselves as the law create through their absence of meekness before God the greatest obstacle to their development. They will never enter into the kingdom of heaven, which is harmony with the law. When the great master said, "Thy will, not mine, be done," he gave perfect expression to this great law of meekness before God, before the law. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Verse 6. The central word in this verse is righteousness, which in the ancient Aramaic means truth. In Aramaic, the same word served for both truth and righteousness. In some versions of the gospel, the word is translated truth, and others by righteousness. Both are correct. Truth represents a more universal notion than righteousness, which may be defined as truth manifested in action. If we read, "Blessed are they who do hunger and thirst after truth," then we have one of the most universal laws ever revealed in humanity. There are several aspects to this law. A plant, for instance, thirsts for water and hungers for the various ingredients of the earth. It is receptive and assimilates all these preconditions of life. Man, too, has hunger and thirst. His material body hungers for food and thirsts for drink, while his thinking body hungers and thirsts for knowledge of the law of the truth. To be hungry and thirsty is to be receptive and ready to absorb sources of energy and knowledge. According to the great law of life here enunciated, such hunger and thirst are the chief preconditions of individual evolution towards perfection and the kingdom of God. It is the disciples' hunger and thirst which determine the teaching of the Master. The latter is without limit, but the disciple can absorb only so much as his hunger and thirst, his receptivity permit. A plant is receptive to earth, water, and sunshine, immense sources of life. If it could absorb its receptivity without limit, it would be able to absorb all the ingredients of the earth, all the air from the atmosphere, all the water and sunshine on the planet. The degree of evolution and perfection reached by an organism depends entirely on its receptivity, of which hunger and thirst are the symbol. While the hunger and thirst of the material body are limited, those of the thinking body for knowledge and truth are boundless. Those without this spiritual hunger and thirst will never enter into the kingdom of heaven. One of the greatest gifts that can be given to man is this eternal hunger and thirst after truth and of knowledge. There are people who think they are satisfied, know everything, and possess eternal truth, who have lost their hunger and thirst. This is a great mistake. When the hunger and thirst for greater and greater knowledge and higher truth are sacrificed for a particular system of thought, or for some teacher however great there may be, there is an end to individual evolution. One of the reasons for the harsh words of Jesus the Essene against the scribes and the Pharisees was their belief that they possessed the only law, and their unwillingness to hear anything new beyond that which they already had. In the light of this law of life, the scribes and Pharisees, who are still among us today, are spiritually dead, though they have the appearance of life. To lose this hunger and thirst for the truth is the greatest disaster that can befall a man. Throughout history, there have been many institutions, hierarchies, religions, and churches which have thought themselves to be in possession of the only law. They persecuted those who still had this thirst and hunger for more knowledge and higher truth, killing, burning, and crucifying them. Most of these institutions and churches are long since dead and gone, but the spirit of hunger and thirst for higher truth lives and is still the dominant law of the spiritual evolution of mankind. This great law is the only one which can save us from the great errors of one-sidedness. Those who have lost the thirst and hunger for truth and are satisfied with some system of teaching become one-sided and search no more for further knowledge and higher truth. They thus set up a wall between them and the cosmic ocean of love and truth. The wall of one-sidedness will isolate them and prevent them from acquiring ever-widening knowledge in the spirit of hunger and thirst after the truth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Verse 7. This great law of life has several aspects and meaning. The first meaning is that we should be merciful in thought, word, and deed towards others. To be merciful is to forgive others, to avoid thinking, feeling, and acting in reaction to their negative thought, feeling, and actions. Many are the deviations from this great law. Often we are unmerciful and criticize the words and deeds of other people. We depart from the law in so doing because the only judge is the law itself. We cannot substitute our own judgment for the law. Ethically, we have not the right to think about the faults of others, nor is it logical to do so. We make a double error by introducing into the thinking body inharmonious negative thoughts. We poison the thinking body, which is more important than the material body. In addition, the creation of negative inferior currents of thoughts also affects the person we think about. The molecular motion of our brain causes a resonance in the molecular motion of the brain cells of the other person, with the result that we poison his feeling body as well as our own. The intoxication is thus twofold. Deviation from the great law of life, which bids us to be merciful, brings about a deterioration of our thinking, feeling, and material bodies, since the glandular activity of the body is responsive to the harmony or inharmony of the nervous system. Even the physical body will suffer the consequence of inharmonious thoughts and feelings. If we look around us, we shall see many deviations from this law of life. Arguments, disputes, gossips, calumny, harsh words, ugly thoughts and feelings. At election time, newspapers are stuffed with the negative thoughts thrown by one party at the other. The struggle between classes in human society is also a deviation from this law of life. When nation speaks against nation and party against party, there is collective departure from the law, bringing suffering to the individual, the family, the community, the nation, and the whole of mankind. An immense price is paid for this deviation, as history, past and present, shows. When we are not merciful, we dwell in the kingdom of negation, peopled by inferior thoughts, feeling, and deeds. This represents a tremendous drag on our individual development, so that instead of progressing, we go downwards. For in the spiritual, as in the material realm, there is no standing still. We go forward or backward.
I'll be back later on with part 2 of this. Just had a little emergency to come up. I love you. I got to run and take care of something real quick.